Hey there, Knicks fans. How you doing? It's your boy, Jonathan Macri, with you for another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. My apologies to you that you exist in one of the universes where the Knicks did not make the playoffs this year and once again stink. And you are here listening to us talk not about playoff basketball. No. But in fact, something, well, we'll find out, because as is par for the course, I don't know what Jeremy has for us today, but I do know the most important part, which is we do have Jeremy with us. Jeremy Cohen. Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm good, John. Doing all right. Excited to watch more basketball after this. Hopefully the Rangers win. By the time people hear this, it'll either be Pittsburgh up 3-1 or the Rangers tying it 2-2. So fingers crossed that the Rangers can actually win this one. But no, we know what's coming up in terms of today's cap or no cap. It's a certain star, not a superstar.
Yes.
Actual star.
Big designation.
Huge designation.
Big week for stars versus superstars.
Very much so. Yeah. And I'm sure we will be talking all about that in a spoiler-filled, I can't emphasize this enough, spoiler-filled Producer's Corner. But until
Get
then,
it out the way now. Get it out the way now. If you are listening to this, the end of the show, we're talking about Doctor Strange. Don't get mad at us now. Thank you, Jeremy.
Anytime. But, we can talk about that angle, but I wanted to touch base with you on it, because obviously, since we last talked about the superstar-star conversation, there have been games played. And
let me stop you right there.
Okay.
Yes. Jalen Brunson is a superstar.
Knew it. That's what I was going for. I needed you to say it, and I'm glad you did.
I mean, is there anything else that every Knicks fan? I mean, look, if you're a Knicks fan, you're as we've discussed in the past, you're probably a basketball fan in general. Like, you're watching all these series, but the Dallas is kind of like, especially with the Frank stuff the other night. It's like, what Knicks fan isn't watching every Dallas minute, at least as much as any other series?
Yeah, it's certainly relevant, but it's fascinating too, because all these games that we've talked about are just the players that they've had. Like, you have a great game and this player's elite. You have a bad game, this player sucks. It's so up and down, and it's hard to find some sort of like almost homeostasis in there. But what I wanted to ask you, because I was listening to the podcast that you and Andrew were doing this past Friday, and you had mentioned how you see it differently, in the sense of that a star under the age of 30 will make their, and not on an expiring contract, will kind of force their way. And I don't fully disagree.
Might. Yeah.
Sure. Well, even let's operate on the idea that it, what was essentially the procedural process gets upended and someone does it. What I wanted to ask you, because I know that also part of our debate was that, like, for you, they're superstars and they're like really the at most top 8. And then for us, it's maybe a little bit more than that, might be a little bit more generous. Yeah. So what I wanted to know was who you had in mind who was a superstar and is going to move within the next couple of years and fits the requirement of like not, like still below the age of 30 and has multiple years left.
That's a great question. And the obvious answer, or the honest / obvious answer, is I don't know. I don't have someone in particular in mind of the players that we looked at now where I'm like, oh, I think it's going to be Luka, in terms of like players that we peg now, or I think it's going to be Giannis, or I think it's going to be Embiid, or opening it up a little bit more to, and again, you allowed for this in your presentation, the fact that some players who we may not consider superstars right now, that designation may change in the next year to 2 years, and it may change before those players get to a year left on their second contract, before they turn 30, the whole thing. I just think it will happen at some point, and it'll happen at some point in the next 10 years. If you're asking me to pick a name right now, who's going to do it? I'm not saying he's going to do it to New York. In fact, I don't think he's ever going to come to New York. But I think Luka, there's a good chance that he forces his way out of Dallas. But I'll go to the well. I'll go Zion. I don't think I think Zion is going to get to superstar status, and I think he's going to force his way out before he gets to a year left on his contract before his 30th birthday. That's
essentially the name I thought you were going for, but it was interesting just for me to hear based on what we had talked about, what you were talking about. So didn't want to hold your feet to the fire, but I'm glad you could kind of confirm who you kind of feel will be in that case. So
awesome. I do.
Cool.
I feel like I just got gotcha'd.
No, you didn't. No. It's not. I'm not trying to play gotcha. It was more, we had what I thought was a really great conversation. And I'm sure we'll have more of those conversations, especially later on, but trying to kind of understand where your head was at, because I know the parameters you had were different, and trying to then work within those confines of, okay, well, who might that player be, or generally speaking, and like how it might line up. Because again, like the struggle for me with Zion is obvious high ceiling talent. It's the availability factor of 85 games, 3 years. Can he stay healthy? Can he keep doing what he was doing? And I mean, but like what not this season, but the season before, didn't he go for 27 points per game? Not that that's
he put up some ridiculous numbers. Yes.
Right, just absurd stuff. So it was more like who we could find common ground, or not even really, but just the idea of who that superstar might be, and then understanding their situation. And the contract stuff is going to be fascinating with him, as you wrote in the newsletter too. Like the idea of David Griffin saying that it would be a challenge only implies that there are going to be restrictions in some way, whether it's stopping short of a full max or doing a full max, but providing enough injury and insurance in there that it basically renders a lot of it where Zion's not really making a max contract.
Can I give you some props here though? So one of the great sports writers of our time, Mark Berman, wrote today. I saw something. Andrew's face, right? That was fantastic. Wrote something today along the lines of like what has been intimated by many other NBA media people at any number of times over the last year, which is that Donovan Mitchell is basically going to call the shots this summer. And like, if he wants a new coach, he's going to get a new coach. If he wants Rudy Gobert traded, he's going to get Rudy Gobert traded. And I don't think any of us are in disagreement over the fact that Donovan Mitchell, you could quibble.
Not going to say it because
I'm not going to say it.
We'll say the producer's corner.
You could quibble. Is he the 13th best player in the league? Is he the 15th best player in the league? Is he the 17th or 18th? Whatever. He's not in the superstar category. The fact that someone like him is wielding that kind of power, and that's just the latest example. I think to your point that you made, the truth exists that if you are a good enough NBA player, you are the most, other than the person who owns the team, you are the highest on the totem pole in terms of you calling the shots. So while we have seen big trades in the past, as you went through, like there have been big trades, if it gets to a certain player, certain caliber, certain level, like there is a reason that we haven't seen these trades yet. It's because if the player, like, unless the player is just like, there's literally nothing you could do to appease me, which again, I think will happen at some point where a player's just like, I don't want to be here. I don't care who the fuck you fire and rehire. But like owners will do everything in their power to make sure that players of this caliber, and again, Donovan Mitchell is not of the caliber of player we're talking about, owners will keep them happy. They just will.
They will. And I think the one potential obstacle that could get in the way of what you're suggesting is there will be a new CBA in the not too distant future. And we know how these markets, especially small markets, are frustrated by their stars leaving.
It's a non-negotiable issue for these small markets. Even if it hasn't happened to them already, it's as well as I do, it'll be a non-negotiable issue.
Yeah. And I'm sure for a lot of small markets, it's also like, if it can happen to them, it can happen to us. And if it can happen to us, we don't want that. And I get it, right? Like I am the type of person who will, for pretty much every single issue, side with the players.
Player empowerment. Yeah.
And I think that I would recommend it for all, because that's just player empowerment is something. And we could get into this conversation, which I think dilutes the situation. It's like, oh, they're multimillionaires and all this. And it has nothing to do with that. It just has something to do with unions and having the right to be able to advocate for the conditions that you want. And by enrolling in the draft, you're signing away your rights. I mean, I'm sure you know this regardless, but even coming from a law background, where without the CBA, the draft would be illegal.
Yes.
Because they enter into it. And there's a players association and there's the governors. But then there's no one to really argue and advocate for the prospects, because they're not in the NBA yet. So it's fascinating to me how they can go about that. But these players don't choose where they go more oftentimes than not. And then as a result, they're stuck in these markets and they can't typically leave unless things get really bad. And even then it's difficult to do. But how the CBA will be enacted, where there may be stipulations behind how and when players can move, even though teams, of course, can trade players and they say it's a business and players do it back and it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah.
It's going to be really fascinating to see if the NBA does force the NBPA and say this is non-negotiable, where you can get your money or you can make your choice to leave, but also not really giving them the option to leave, because then that's less money that would be in the pockets of the teams.
And two quick things on this. One, if you're sitting there and you're like, well, small market organizations are not going to fear that they're going to say like, well, we're not as poorly run as the Pelicans, and like, we have a better owner than, Gail Benson or whatever. Go through the standings of the NBA. I'm not going to say every small market team has been touched by something of this nature already, because they haven't all been, but they've had like, a lot of them have had dust ups, they've had brush ups with this sort of thing. And if they haven't, you want to give me Milwaukee, right? Like Giannis decided to stay, right? Great success story for a small market team. But like, if you're that owner, shouldn't you just be like, my God, thank God Giannis is a kind of, not to say a quirky dude, but like, or Denver, the Denver ownership group. And they had, by the way, they had Melo that didn't go the Jokic route. Like, you don't want to be sitting there and praying that like the superstar that you land and you luck into is of this kind of caliber, that, because it just comes down to chance. And then the only other thing I'll say is it should be obvious at this point, I think the Simmons thing, if this issue was on a cliff, I think the Simmons thing pushed it over the cliff, because how can owners look at the situation and be like, oh, this is fine? Say what you want about Ben Simmons and whatever, missed a 3 or didn't take a 3-foot jump shot or 3-foot layup and this and that. Like, that dude still kind of took it to a place that it hasn't been taken to before. And what if the next guy, is not someone who passes up, 3-foot layup, and it's someone that a team actually wants to keep. So we'll see.
I think the one thing too with that is a reason, I'm speculating here, but I would imagine that Daryl Morey wanted to get a better talent regardless.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be surprised if the league maybe applied a little bit of pressure, saying you have to consider the ramifications, where if you sell low on Ben Simmons, the precedent that you have set is an awful one. And in the end, right? I mean, Morey got what he wanted. He got James Harden.
Credit to him.
He got exactly what he needed out of the deal. And he was,
well, look at what he went through.
Went through a lot.
And imagine if he didn't have Joel Embiid to like prop up the organization in the meantime. Like, it could have torpedoed the franchise, but it could have done a lot worse.
100%. And I think that's the key to all of this, where it's like, yes, we did trade him and he did put up a bit of a fight in terms of wanting to be here. But the reality is we upgraded, and that's the way that they will try to probably set it up when it comes to negotiating and how you can.
The players, you mean?
The NBA to the NBPA of like, Ben Simmons wanted out, but we stood firm. And the only way we tried to do it was we tried to assuage the situation as best we could, but also we needed to do what was right for us. And that was getting a better player that fits what we need in James Harden.
Yeah, for sure.
So in the meantime, We can talk about someone where the runner-up, right, to the Rookie of the Year that Ben Simmons actually won, which was hotly contested. Robbed, yes.
He was robbed.
Not a real rookie.
Before we get to him, give me a percentage chance Donovan Mitchell ever becomes a superstar in your eyes. Well, all three of us could answer this.
Considering how I said the gap between superstar and star is bigger than star and starter.
Yeah.
Exceptional player, but I'm going to go 10%.
Oh, wow.
And that might honestly be on the higher end. And again, it's not disrespect. I don't mean it.
Why do you hate him?
Why do I hate Donovan Mitchell? Yeah.
Andrew, why do you hate Donovan Mitchell?
I don't hate Donovan Mitchell. I have always leaned Devin Booker in the shooting guard rankings, but
you've been consistent on that, by the way.
I think here's the thing is like your market does play a part in this. Some superstars are able to transcend market. I think this is where John would say, if you're a true superstar, you would transcend market. I think there is a world where if Mitchell is here and having the seasons that he's having in Utah and he's doing it in New York City, that we'll treat him like a superstar and he'll get like MVP votes and second team All NBA consideration. So all of that banter to say that I'll give it like 25%. Now, here's the thing. Would he actually be a superstar? Would he be considered a superstar? I think are two different conversations.
I'm going to go closer to Jeremy here. I'm going to go 15%.
So we split the baby here.
Yeah, we split the baby.
How about this? I'll go 20 to make it so it's 10, 15, 20. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's fair.
Makes me feel better.
Yeah. Okay. So you're saying we got a chance.
Works. It's something.
Or as the conversation led to that Jeremy brought up, the conversation led to the other day, John, you don't need necessarily a superstar to win a championship. You need a well-constructed roster that can be led by two stars.
Yes, it's tougher. It's a lot tougher to do it that way, but the NBA history says that it's possible. We just say that.
Definitely possible. 100% possible.
Okay. So without further ado, Jeremy.
Without further ado, we have Donovan Mitchell. Tangled webs we weave. See, if I had connected the dots, I could have done a Spider-Man theme because it's Spider and Marvel, but I didn't. So we'll have to just live with the emojis of spiders and webs. I do want to preface one thing really quickly, especially if you are listening to this and not watching it. Because of the fact that Donovan Mitchell is already under contract, this isn't going to be like a super cap heavy pod. So I also wanted to give people a little bit of a break. I know we've kind of been super high level in terms of the configurations and what's possible. Almost Doctor Strange style.
I was about to say, yeah.
But in this sense, it's much more manageable just based on that there are, in my opinion, more knowns because of the finances already being settled.
I like the spider. Emoji? No, those aren't emojis.
No, they're emojis. They are.
Oh, they are? Okay.
Yeah.
Nice emojis.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't know why I'm taking credit for them. I didn't create them, but I added them. So you're welcome. So let's get into the good stuff, right? Because I feel like one of the things that happens with a lot of these conversations is when we don't like someone, we just harp on the negatives. When we do love someone, we disregard the negatives and focus on the positives. So even though Donovan Mitchell had a very rough postseason, probably arguably the roughest of anyone, although maybe there's anyone else that you have in mind. If so, speak now, forever hold your peace.
I was about to pull up his stats for this postseason because I think it's tempting to gloss over like the fact that a guy may not be terribly efficient, which Donovan Mitchell was not this postseason. It's tempting to gloss over the stuff that he did do, and at the same time, like it's not easy to do the things that he did in what is, I think everybody would agree, a poor postseason. For him at least, like this is still a guy who, here I'm pulling it up right now. I'm going to guess that he averaged 28 points a game in this postseason.
I think it was less.
Yeah, it was a little bit less, 25 and a half. Excuse me. I was a little, but still, as of right now, ninth leading scorer by average in the postseason with almost 6 assists. So like again, this is a guy we're talking about had a bad postseason. Compare those, counting stats to Julius Randle last year.
Exactly. Very big difference. And so, what does Donovan Mitchell do well? Well, he's elite as a pick and roll ball handler. I think in terms of the top 5 qualified players, I want to say he ranked 3rd, 5th. He was up.
Sounds about right.
He was just phenomenal. And his playmaking really did well on the half court. Even though he's used as a combo guard and he's on the shorter side and maybe shouldn't be a shooting guard, he still took strides and grew his game because, again, like a lot of these players, there is room for growth. They're not exactly who they are at the ages that they are, and they're locked in that forever. And he is overall a very efficient player. I think this year he struggled a bit more than in years past. And the improvements he made around the rim and in the mid-range, phenomenal. As usual, draws a ton of fouls, really good pull-up shooter, which we know that the Knicks certainly like in players, specifically in the backcourt and potentially at the 3 as well, to be determined. And, he's just a relentless driver and he's a really good finisher. And those are all the key aspects of why you would want a player like him and why he's so tantalizing for many.
I think the other thing to throw in there, and you kind of intimated this with the way you talked about some of this stuff. There's only one player that could be in the 100th percentile in usage rate for a position, at least according to Cleaning the Glass. And for combo guards, that's Donovan Mitchell. I mean, he has a year after he had a 35 usage rate. It was last season. This past season, he had a 34.5 usage rate. So you might be asking, like, well, why do I care about usage rate? If anything, you could look at that as a detriment. Like, this is a guy who was probably a little bit too selfish. That's fine. You could look at that this way. And again, I don't sit here and watch every Utah game like none of us do. And if you do, like, more credit to you. But I think there was a bit of a dearth of playmaking on Utah. And also, like, this is how they ran their offense. Like, it's just, spread pick and roll. That's all it was. Spread pick and roll with Rudy as the guy in the dunker spot, or Hassan Whiteside if Rudy Gobert was sitting. So, like, this is what they asked him to do, and he did it. He did it as much as anyone in the league. Again, going back to the well again and again and again and again. And it's just an interesting discussion because, like, Quinn Snyder has this reputation, probably justifiably so, as a guy who runs this more like a more sophisticated offense, and at the same time, like, they leaned on the talents of Donovan Mitchell and Jordan Clarkson and Mike Conley a lot. And they just needed those guys to especially Donovan Mitchell. So I think that's notable. I think we should at least throw that in there.
100%. Great points. Completely agree. And then to look at kind of where the not so good stuff is, right? He's a smaller guard. He's got a great wingspan, which is super important, and also kind of factors into the being a low effort defender makes it even more disappointing. Is it kind of like, is he checked out? If so, why? What is he able to do to impact the game on the defensive end if he's not going to be anything more than a traffic cone with his hands down? Because there were some possessions where he didn't even lift his arms. And you're like, again, if that's your best tool from a defensive standpoint, why wouldn't you use them? And it's kind of trying to get into the mindset of why that might be the case. This year, he was really bad in the catch and shoot. I mean, it was just disgustingly bad. And I think that led to a lot of other problems down the line because as the season progressed, his shot struggled. And then, he's relatively healthy. He's 25 years old, turning 26. But I think some things to consider. He has had some ankle injuries that he's generally been fine with. But honestly, the thing that concerns me with Donovan Mitchell is he has a repeated history with concussions. And at a certain point, you hope that it doesn't catch up with him. It's obviously very concerning to have any sort of brain issues whatsoever. So it's just something to keep in mind. I don't know if it's necessarily, you don't say, oh, well, because he had some concussions, we shouldn't trade for Donovan Mitchell. But it is, in my opinion, more of a minor factor in terms of the ceiling that he can reach and what he can do, but a factor nonetheless.
Yeah. I mean, You throw it in there. The defense stuff is interesting to me because like I distinctly remember pre-draft. This is a guy who was looked at as a defense first player. Like all of the questions about him were surrounding his offense, not his defense. So the fact that it actually reminds me a lot of Karl-Anthony Towns. Like remember Towns pre-draft was seen as a guy who was like we thought like people thought like his offense would come around and like the makings were there, but this was a dude who was seen as like a going to be a good defender at the very least, maybe not a great one, but a good defender. Like I thought Donovan Mitchell, the defensive ceiling was even higher. Like he was a dog, man, at Louisville. I remember that distinctly. And for him to come in and now be such a minus after 5 years in the league, you know, I don't know what that says about him, but it should be noted at the very least.
Yeah, it was the reverse. He was supposed to be the defensive-minded guy with the great wingspan, and the shot was the question. I think he just didn't shoot it super well at Louisville, and there was a reason why. I know folks often might kind of revise history of the Knicks and Frank Ntilikina and the draft selection, all that, but it was really Frank, Dennis Smith Jr., and Malik Monk, and then they were trying to get another pick in order to take Donovan Mitchell, but he was not really a priority, and the oversight. Yes, obviously that in itself is a problem if you can't even see why Donovan Mitchell is that promising. But hindsight's 2020, and there's a reason why after Donovan Mitchell's workout in Utah, who traded up to acquire him, they basically said, if any of you leak this workout, you're going to be fired, because that's how much they believed in him.
Yeah,
sure enough,
good job by them.
They did. And I seem to recall that one of the key reasons why they got the workout was because of Walt Perrin pushing for it. I think that was the reason why. But regardless, he is and was a member of the Utah Jazz. So
for how much longer, we shall see.
Yes. So this was something I found on Twitter.
Wow.
Franco had a really fascinating graph here.
Can I say what this reminds me of? If you're not watching on Twitter, I'm looking at something that reminds me of actually, you don't need to see the program, the Loki show where the timelines, off
a lot of different
the main.
So
I'm seeing a lot of squiggly lines on a graph. That's all.
Exactly. So basically what you are seeing is it's the Jazz's 3-point percentage by time and the scoring probability as it goes on. So this was I don't know if I said it or not. Itzhak Franco on Twitter came up with this. And what it shows is the top one is Mike Conley. And it's kind of like a parabola where he essentially started off really well and then dipped and then ended up in a really good spot. And then you got, well, I'll skip that one because it's relevant. But you have the team as a whole where they start off pretty well and then dropped off. Bojan Bogdanovic started kind of slow and then did really well and then finished around where he started off, which was just very meh. And then I believe that's Jordan Clarkson, who started a little late due to injury. And then when he did start and play, or rather when he played, because he came off the bench, he pretty much hovered around where he was, give or take. But the really fascinating one.
The takeaway here is Bogdan, Jordan Clarkson, and Mike Conley all finished the year essentially where they started in terms of their 3-point percentage over the course of the year.
Exactly. And then you get Donovan Mitchell, who started above 40% from a scoring probability standpoint. And it just looks like a ski slope down a mountain. And he finished below 30. That probably is bordering on closer to 26%. And that showed in a lot of ways in the playoffs. He is someone who typically kind of turns it on, so to speak, when it gets to playoff time, but it's bad. His shooting torpedoed. And if you're not going to be a superstar on offense and you're not going to be a positive on defense, where does that leave you? What type of player are you going to be in terms of winning when it matters? Because we can talk about the 82 games and how important those are, but they also all lead up to the 16 games or 16 wins that you hope to have in the postseason. And only one team is going to be able to do that.
Yeah. And the interesting thing here is I'm not sure Not sure what conclusions you could draw going back and looking at his playoff history thus far. I mean, he kind of burst onto the scene back in 2018, famously, kind of it's been said by some that like his relentless, or the Jazz's relentless hunting of Carmelo Anthony was part of the contribution for Melo, like basically not having a job in the league for the better part of a year. But like that very first series against OKC, he shot 36% from three in that series. Mitchell shot 44%, took 44 threes over the course of that first round series in 6 games, shot 36%. The next series against Houston, he shot 25% on threes. He shot 9 for 36. Okay, fine. The next year faced Houston again 25% on threes. Next year after that was the famous series against Denver, in which Donovan, I think he put up 50 at least once, maybe more than once, I'm forgetting. But like he was absolutely on fire. He shot 51% from deep in that series. And unfortunately they lost. And then last year, again, it was more of a high. He shot 40% against Memphis in the first round, and then 45% from deep again against the Clippers in the second round. And then this year, 20% from three. So like, I don't really know what you do with that career arc from three so far through 5 seasons. I mean, it's inconsistent. I don't know what conclusions you draw from it though.
Yeah, I don't know. I agree. It's probably just hoping to pair him with someone who's better than him and then giving him more opportunities. But even still, if he can't hit the catch and shoot shots, like if he can't spot up well, that's not going to help you either. And then like, I don't know how many players are going on defense are going to ignore Donovan Mitchell or ice him out. But at a certain point, if a guy's not feeling it, like, does that play into how you're doing? Do you focus your attentions elsewhere? How does that help with Donovan Mitchell if he's getting played off the floor defensively, but can stay on it offensively, but he's not producing the offense? Where does that leave you?
I also wonder how much shot selection goes into this, and like, was there a certain amount of settling going on? I feel like watching Jazz games and like listening to the Jazz commentators on some of these games, you got a sense that like when these leads would start to slip away in these games this year, because Jazz famously blew more big leads than the Knicks this season, which might seem unfathomable, but they did. And a lot of that was like, yeah, they let teams creep back in because they would just, I don't say take their foot off the gas, but they wouldn't have that extra gear to like dig in and like get some tough points when they really needed it. How much of that was Donovan Mitchell just, taking some bad threes when the situation didn't warrant it? I don't know. And I don't know that we're going to find out the answer to that until he maybe gets a new home, but or things change in Utah.
Absolutely. So in terms of his contract, while he is still in Utah at the moment, he's got 3 years of team control left. He has a player option in 2025, which would be the 4th year. As we've discussed, he's going to decline that. And the reason, because that's number one, why would you not? Unless it's, I mean, like, again, there's really no reason for him not to, unless he gets hurt, which knock on wood does not happen. Or he just gets a new contract when the salary cap spikes and makes himself quite a lot of money, and good for him, as he is deserving of it. This upcoming year, it's $30.4 million that he's owed. The following year is $32.6 million, and the year after that is $34.8 million. Again, there's a 2025 player option that we mentioned, and there is a 15% trade kicker. So if you're thinking like, oh, Julius Randle, he's got a trade kicker. Donovan Mitchell, he's got a trade kicker. And you feel like, oh, maybe the Knicks could do something with those players. Congratulations. Even though they could both waive it, it's still... One could waive it, that being Donovan Mitchell, and Julius Randle keeps his, so the math works. Whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. Point being, he also has a trade kicker. Congratulations. So it brings up the question, though, John. Why would Utah want to trade Donovan Mitchell right now?
Why would they want to, or why would they?
I mean, both. You could separate it, but let's say why would they? Not why would they want to.
It's pretty clear they don't want to.
Correct.
Like, yes. Okay.
Yeah. So the first thing that a lot of fans forget about is that the NBA And the teams involved in the NBA know that first and foremost, it is a business. Let's say that the Jazz ship out Donovan Mitchell. Okay. Who are they marketing? Who are they telling season ticket holders? Who are they telling fans to buy jerseys of?
I don't know. I think Julius Randle would look good in that multi-toned rock
mustard
rock jersey, whatever it is. Oh no, I forgot that they're going to this new look. Yes.
Yeah. Again, it's like you want to sell fans on competition, and there are some teams like Charlotte that don't care as much about talent. They care about talent, but they also care about their bottom line, avoiding costs, working with a budget, a fixed one at that. And I think that's something that people need to consider, especially in terms of prying that player away, where if you're someone like Ryan Smith, who owns the Utah Jazz, and you might see the writing on the wall, but you also know that you can stand to make more money in the next couple of years, and you keep Donovan Mitchell than trading him away and dealing with uncertainty and the draft and all of it leading up to that point, you may just say, even if Donovan Mitchell wants to go, I would like to keep him. And at the end of the day, we as the team, yes, this is a player-driven league, star-driven league especially, but we as a team will dictate, Donovan, we don't want to trade you, and you're going to have to keep playing here. It's a slippery slope of, two not teams, but like two different groups of people that feel like they have the leverage over the other.
I think, we're going to touch on this issue with a couple other points here, but like, keep in mind this guy, Ryan Smith, who's not a older owner. He's I don't know if he's the youngest NBA owner, but he's on the younger side, right? He just bought this team. He bought this team within the last couple of years. Like, it's not an accident that like one of his first acts upon buying the team was getting Dwayne Wade, who among recently retired or relatively recently retired NBA players, is there a guy who, players look up to more than Dwayne Wade? I mean, I don't know. There's not one, or at least someone who is like still like present and kind of around the league. Like, he's up there. So he just got this team with, one of the young stars in the league leading the way, brought in like everything has been geared, I think, towards like, I have this guy here. I'm buying the team in part because there is this guy here, and I want to keep this guy here. And I think Wade was part of that and the whole thing, which leads to the next part of it, which is like, there's a reason you go out of your way to try to keep this guy, because you don't quit on talent.
Exactly. I hate that I use Dave Gettleman to bring a point home, because
your boy,
my boy, no longer, fortunately. But yeah, you don't quit on talent. You don't let it go. And the one thing I'll add to the whole Ryan Smith situation, well, first of all, there gets two things. Number one, he was involved with, I believe it was Qualtrics.
Yes.
Which is incredibly lucrative. I think he's worth over $8 billion. So if the concern is luxury taxes and he sees this as a business, but also as a toy, then maybe he just doesn't really care as much and he could spend more. The second thing, and I think this honestly might be the most important factor of anything that the Jazz do between now and whenever Donovan Mitchell is likely / inevitably traded, he grew up a Utah Jazz fan. It's more than just purchasing a team, and like A-Rod is buying the Timberwolves. He has no connection to Minnesota. No. He's just one of a group of investors, and that entity, there are only 30 possible teams to be purchased, and it's really hard to buy one unless you have an expansion, which the bid is outrageous. But for someone like Ryan Smith, it's not just professional in business, it's personal, and he's going to do everything he can to help satisfy what he wants. So not quitting on talent is important, unless, of course, and we'll talk about the other player in a moment, but they decide to do things differently. But it's also easy to forget, even with the Jazz not being able to take that next step. I mean, they've had the best offense in the NBA last year, and the top 10 offense, a top 10 offense for 3 straight seasons.
Fourth the prior year, and then like you said, first this year. That's like,
That's good.
It's really good. And it's not something you just throw away.
No, and they shouldn't, honestly. There are adjustments they can make that fortify the team, but it's something to consider. And then you talk about business. I mean, the All-Star game is going to be in Utah in 2023, assuming that the anti-transgender bill doesn't impact them. I know it affected the All-Star game in Charlotte. Honestly, just personally, hopefully they retract it because it's disgusting, and Utah also gets threatened and they're able to do something about it. But politics for the moment aside, if it is going to be there, then you're going to want to retain your best player and have him represent your home team, because the thought of trading Donovan Mitchell and then he winds up back in your building and it's for the All-Star game and he's wearing a different jersey. I mean, that's rough, especially if there's a situation where, let's say he's traded to another team and that team has not made its trip to Utah yet, and his return in Salt Lake City for any game is the All-Star game. It feels like that's the entire narrative of that weekend. It's not going to be like, look at this fun event that we've had in Salt Lake City. It's going to be Donovan Mitchell was in your building and now he's not, but he is again, but he's with another team for the All-Star game, which names the best players in the NBA, even though it's also a popularity contest, and you guys let him go. Yeah, you got something back for him. You got a great haul, but why? And
if you don't think he'd be going for the MVP in that game, I got news for you. And like, I think I'm sure this has been said already. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that shouldn't be dictating thinking. Again, these are multi-billionaires. Like, the things that drive us or the things that we think should drive them, just throw it out the window. It's like, this is a toy for this man. Like, this is a plaything. He doesn't want to have the thing that he acquired for enjoyment purposes be thrown back in his face. They're like, oh, look how you screwed this up. It matters.
It does. And, if you're trading Donovan Mitchell, what are you getting back if you're Utah? You want a star in return. And when you look at the market, not of superstars, but just stars, it doesn't seem nearly as beneficial or as fruitful, I guess, as it might be in a couple of years. And that's important because, yeah, you could take a swing on a bunch of draft picks, but it sucks rebuilding. Like, all you have to look forward to in a lot of ways is the draft. And sure, you can say like, oh, well, we've got these young talent, and it's basically just potential being used to make you feel better about the situation you're currently in, which is bleak. And it's hard to sometimes come back from multiple years of tanking. Sure, tanking can lead to wins, and you can, like we're seeing in a place like Philadelphia, and maybe they pull it off and get to the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time since Allen Iverson did it. But you also lose a lot of not just the revenue, but kind of the goodwill that you've built up with the fans, especially if that's the only team in that market. And outside of the MLS, it is. It's the only professional team.
So just real quick on this, and I know you're about to get the last point, which is the value of Rudy Gobert. And many other people have posited the notion of like, well, if you're going to trade one, trade them both. And maybe they can do that. Maybe they can just, clean house. If they trade Donovan Mitchell, almost regardless of what they get back for him, and they keep Rudy Gobert and they keep the rest of the team as is, they are not going to tank. And then I think there's a whole discussion about like how they pivot from Mitchell if they're not pivoting into a tank, which we don't really need to get into. But like, if you're like, well, no, then they should just trade both. Okay, well, then you got to trade both guys in trades that return essentially nothing but like salary flotsam and picks, which easier said than done. But put that aside, this is not something. And again, it's a new owner. I get like maybe he doesn't care about like Jazz precedent, and that may be true. I would say other than Indiana, is there a team that has less history of tanking or forget, don't even call it tanking, just like losing? Like, there's an organization that does not give into losing. They have never done it. If you go back and look through their history, they have one really terrible season to their credit, or two terrible seasons to their credit. 2013-14, they finished 25-57. I'm pretty sure that was before they got Dante Exum. And then in 2004-2005, they finished 26-56. But you go back and like you have to go pre-Stockton Malone to find another season that was really bad.
Exactly. And I am trying to kind of like think about teams in the NBA, especially that are smaller market, that maintained winning, even if they weren't a contender, but just put
them in the Pacers.
Yeah. No, I honestly don't.
I mean, you want to tell me the Spurs, but like the Spurs also had two of the greatest players of all time. Throw Kawhi in there if you want, like on their roster for the last 30 plus years.
And how did they get Tim Duncan? They shut down.
they selectively tanked,
and they got what they need. I mean, Tim Duncan could have been a Celtic for his entire career. Fortunately, he was not. But like that's how close it could have come to in terms of the lottery luck. There was no guarantee, and if the Spurs don't get him, I mean, we're not looking at them as a model franchise. We're looking at them as a team that's good, but maybe doesn't get there just because they don't have the top end talent. So yeah, it is very difficult to repeatedly put quality on the floor. And, it's also where you find talent. Like they got Donovan Mitchell, the 13th pick. They got Rudy Gobert at the 27th pick. Yeah. Royce O'Neal was international for a while and he was undrafted. Joe Ingles, same thing. In fact, a lot of their Darren Williams was a good pick and he was successful, but then obviously flamed out and wasn't the player that they wanted to be. And they did pass on Chris Paul 100%. But it's almost like you look at their top picks and they didn't hit on those quite as well as they did with their lower picks, which I don't want to say that's fitting because the Knicks, the highest pick that they have had with Walt Perrin here has been 8th, and Obi seems to at least be on the upswing, which is great. But there have been some misses that Utah has had in that top range. And it goes back to the draft is a crapshoot, but they found success in Rudy Gobert. And I still maintain that there will be enough teams, again, as we've talked about, only takes 2 to create a bidding war. Like you're telling me that there aren't 2 teams that look at the scope of the league and players who are likely on the trade block and saying like, yeah, Rudy Gobert is exactly what we need.
Oh,
he won't cost the house. I still go back to see the Atlanta idea.
He'll get good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Like Capella and Herter and the first round pick, or you trade him. I don't know, like Chicago seems to like, I don't know about liking Vooch, but maybe they want to prioritize spacing at the 5 and maybe Gobert wouldn't fit there. But if they change their minds, like they have salary to do it and get it done, they can clear things away. So there are teams that can do it. It's just like Rudy's so good defensively that there's going to then be a drop off on defense, most likely, which will further expose Donovan Mitchell, unless what the Jazz do is get enough players back where they spread it out and they diversify it. So maybe they get a good defensive center, which I would imagine they would. And then maybe they turn around and get someone who's, better on the wing defending wise. So they can be creative here, but that's the whole point. They're going to have Donovan Mitchell calling the shots, and they know no stars are coming to Utah. It's just not a place you go to. And by doing that, Donovan then feels more involved. And the nice thing for him is if it works out, then you can reassess. And if it doesn't work out, you can wipe your hands clean and just go to the next city, because you can say, well, we tried, guys. Didn't work out, but it was fun while it lasted.
I think the takeaway here is like, and I don't know how many people listening to this right now are doing this, but if you don't, this is not the thing to think about where you're like, well, the Jazz it's door A and door B, and door A is they trade Donovan Mitchell, and door B is they don't trade Donovan Mitchell. And they're sitting right now and they're trying to think about like which of those two things to do. And maybe Donovan Mitchell forces their hand and they choose the door that involves trading him. This is like, there's doors, like 1 through 10, and trading Donovan Mitchell for the Jazz is door 10. Unequivocally, it is door 10. And they're going to open each of the first 9 doors, walk through, look around, see what's there. And if there's like no answers in there, then they're going to go to the next door, and then they're going to go to the next door, and so on and so forth until they literally have no other options. This is not something the Jazz are affirmatively going to do for all the reasons you just listed, and probably a few more that we're not even thinking of. I think that's the main takeaway. So for anybody who's like, oh, the Knicks just need to get this done. This isn't a thing the Knicks could get done. The ball is still in Utah's court. Donovan can push their hand a little bit, and I'm sure he will, but that may result in other things happening, not involving Donovan Mitchell playing on a new team.
Yeah, and this is something I hadn't considered before, but you talking about actually prompted it, where, and I know we have discussed this, but like there's good pressure and there's bad pressure.
Sure.
And there's
100%.
Sure, for Utah, there's some bad pressure because it's a ticking clock and you need to really be proactive, but it's also good in the sense that this forces you to make a change. And sometimes you need change in order to grow. Yeah. And, I don't know if they'll find the right talent that gets them to contending status. I'm skeptical, but at least if you say, well, we need to do something different, not completely, but just enough so where we break this partnership up and we, try to find other talent, see which way. We don't have a lot of assets at our disposal, but use up the ones we do. And we have to figure out what's, crossing that bridge later. We'll do that later. It helps them. It's something that at least guides them in the right direction, at least from their vantage point.
Yeah, for sure.